New England Poetry Club. That's right, and now we're recording it. Thank you, Doug. And we're really happy to have you all here this afternoon to be presenting something we've really been looking forward to for a long time, readings by Lindsey Schaffer, Cindy Veach, and Rajiv Mohabir. So I'm going to turn this over to Carmelitte Chamblin, who will really MC and will be introducing the poets. The only thing that I'll ask, and it's pretty common sense, and I think maybe everybody else is muted anyway. But yes, if you are not reading, please do mute your microphone. And at the end, we can all unmute simultaneously and applaud audibly, and also have a discussion if we want. So I'll mute myself, and Carmelitte, turn it over to you.
Thank you, David, for the kind introductions. To start the reading, we'll start with Lindsey Schaffer. Lindsey Schaffer is a poet interested in exploring the intersections between creative writing and museum spaces. In particular, she seeks to understand material culture in the context of the cities in which it is displayed. This focus has led her to unearth a variety of contradictions in two cities, which has culminated in two chapbooks, City of Contradiction, published by Self-Count Station in 2022, and Which City by Dancing Girl Press, forthcoming. Thank you, Lindsey. I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to be reading some poems from both of those chapbooks today. I'm going to start with City of Contradiction. So the first poem I'm going to read from this collection is aptly named City of Contradiction. Elsewhere, on this frosty night, Athens wakes without me. Oblivion teases, sunrise flickers over the Aegean Sea as a waitress yawns, lemon plates crushing wrists under weight of calamari screams. I long to survey the roots that slither beneath salty ruins, puncture the Parthenon with car fumes. By now, I would have already drank frappe from the Muse's cup, studied every stone that had not yet inspired myth. Instead, I curl beside you, missing warmth, grasping for memories that slip away as easily as certainty. From the past, from the fragmented pieces, I resurrect the heat, the stumbling drunk, the modern gods. It is time to construct my own myth from the ruins. This next poem is called Baklava. The perfect baklava requires 6 layers of phyllo dough, coated generously with butter along the way. A crumble assembled from sugar, nuts, and spices is sprinkled in between. On top of that, a honey syrup is drizzled, bathed in amber liquid, and left to sit all night. The city of Athens is layered, periods of time enclosed within one another. Ancient piping lines the metro system, circa 5th century BCE. Decades-old newspapers crust the walls, the elements slowly shredding them into scraps in which the strays lay to rest. The marble of a pagan temple is quarried for a Christian one. Created, recycled, appropriated. This is the life cycle of Athens, and this is the life cycle of baklava, all strewn together, fragments of larger pieces, crafted into one hell of a dessert. This next one is called My Achilles Heel. Crohn's does not appear overnight. A constant tension is required to coil a bowstring. Pressure must be applied, inflamed with friction. It was hard to knock arrows from a chalked line in the grass at summer camp when I was young. Sometimes they flew past the targets and into a meadow. How were we to know how far they would sail? We made sure no one was within range, and yet the arrow would hit its inevitable mark years later. To receive a chronic diagnosis at 18 was to reveal an Achilles heel I didn't know existed. It was hard to be deprived the invincibility of youth. It was hard to watch as my armies burned, unable to stop it. And this next one is called Icons. Forehead, shoulder, shoulder, heart. Amen. Before the altar, outside of myself, I licked fingers, slicked back sin behind ears, drying my mouth with quiet. Michael, heal me, please. Prayer, a pleading, a bargain, a silence. We walk to the icon shop. For 26 euro, a golden skinned Michael for prayer. Postcard size with some incense to light and kiss privately. How much time do I need alone with the angel before he hears me? One service a week simply won't cut it, Michael. The ruined and the pristine. I am 4 temples short of praying to each of the 12 Olympians. The gods wait on Mount Olympus, recline on gold thrones, starve for prayers. Once their temples were slick with libations. Now they crumble, buried beneath generations of debris and laurel trees. The most beautiful pieces were quarried and repurposed in Christian churches, where they have become place markers of divinity for a new god. We visit them for class and memorize their architects. Their names keep me up at night, and every morning I wake to visit Olympian temples. In theology, we read the Bible, and in literature, we study myths. What I take from them so far is that in mythology, all women run, and the only way to escape is to change. Daphne, Eurydice, Atalanta, Thetis. Is this me transforming? The remaining maenads. It goes deeper than the gallows. Pits of galloping satyrs, wreathing, trembling, and pallor beneath laurel trees. Madness steps in when the seams of daylight fade, when bronze crusts and melds to fall. I light incense, watching the tapers curl, wanting nothing save sanity as the moon demands an entrance. Drunk women stumble, splutter past me, teeth ripe with wine. I'm tempted to join, to dance the night away. I came here searching for clues, connection with what I had lost in the modern world. Maybe they are searching too. The earth is growing lusher, but confusion prevents me from touching layers long since settled over. And this is the last poem I'll read from this collection. It's called Final Sunset at the Hill of the Muses. Condensation of fall settles in sunlight spills upon my brow. A ruby throws filtered light upon the Parthenon until ruptured by twilight, the siphoned arrows of Artemis. The last delirious remnants of day dissipate in blushing ripples across the sky. In this moment, everything is slanted, perfect. I pluck a violet and thread it in your hair as we chisel our names on rocks, craving permanence, knowing that one day we too will become myth. All right, so this next collection is called Witch City, and it is forthcoming from Dancing Girl Press, hopefully in the next couple of months. So this first poem is called The Field Trip. In this museum are things: a cane, a landscape, an objection, a scream, cut off by the jerk of a noose heard years later. Words carry weight after all, and they come here to die. In the museum, every story can be synthesized into 150 words or less, and their value is measured in distance. While artifacts wait to become witness to new crimes, tourists remain spectators that miss the show. Here we approach the ledge, drowned in the pallid lights of archival pits, while this mortuary of synthesis begs for the rot it will become. Silence speaks here. Stillness is a slackening when the noose has already been cut. Sundial. Why must a shrinking candle signify the passing of time? What words can be summoned to resurrect a water droplet that has fallen into a pond? The shadows will remain soggy with you long after you have passed. Pressing fingers into my bed, I watch the indent raise, sweeping the nettles from my porch day after day after day, wanting for a memorial that will not decay. The ointment of your touch fades too quickly, like the rays of a sunset that does not leave its bruise on the entrance rug. They say they are good men left, but I see none. I see wood sparred into slivers. I see a stool ready to snap. Listen to the birds. They are trapped too. They were born into bodies that deprive them of choice. Isn't that what it is to be born an animal? The examination of a witch. 1. When I was young, my journal was the only thing that affirmed that I was the truth between two lies. When the response to my hurt was, "I'll give you something to complain about," I wrote about the feeling of being told who I was and how this pain smoldered between my ribs. I would prefer bruises to this. Bruises can be mapped into answers, a stringing of stanzas, an injury that congeals to reveal an impact. If my body cannot lay witness to reverberation, how can I defend phantom pains? At the trial, I am stripped and searched for witch marks. Any red, blue, or brown lesion they can blame on him. They find none. The devil chose more insidious forms of marking me. 2. You want a confession. Let's say he came to me at night. His curved fingernails and lupine jaw drew me towards a quill with curdled milk. Ink. He told me that to sign was to admit that certainty and fear are mutual expressions. I have known too many moon-dew smiles to disagree. He knew I had bigger fears than scripture, that holiness could wait until I was fed, and only the wealthy could afford that kind of devotion. He promised me his book would remain undiscovered, except in the minds of ministers and liars. 3. Yes, I lied to survive. Wouldn't you do the same? When your entire life has been told to you, it is not lying if you can't remember the truth. I tell the court that the devil allowed me to complain, to hear my own voice in writing. My name, for the first time, was mine to decipher. Of course, the book is gone now. Don't you understand that forgiveness is survival when you can't escape? This trial was never about truth. It was about listening to the breeze and calling it a hurricane. It was about predicting the storm to survive. Ghost stories. In New England, there are gravestones everywhere. You may stumble on one crossing the street, tumble headlong into a mausoleum with a half-lit door. But no, it's just the diner off Essex Street. Listen to how their bodies rattle with the oncoming train, how they shake at the technology we push through their bones. In New England, we believe in ghosts only when it suits us. Hauntings can be measured in terms of tragedy. This is why ghosts are rampant in downtown Salem, although the murders took place miles away, behind a CVS at Proctor's Ledge. Here, there is a pregnant silence, a desire to resurrect so that we can have closure of our own. My mom takes out her camera, nudges me to stand in front of the memorial and smile. Portrait of Judge Sewell. Cruel and unusual, delusional thinking there is a painless way to murder. Where are we taught ethics if not in church? Where are we taught evil if not in church? The ministers were Harvard educated, meaning pedestal raised, meaning infallible. In the third lecture, they learned that distance and holiness are two of the same. Murder is just if, how, when, but never us. They learned that the intricacies of a word start with Harvard, end with privilege, hear everyone defend it as divine. 5 years later, after his 2 daughters had died, Sewell became the only judge to apologize for the trials. 327 years later, after voting for the heartbeat bill, a congressman learned that a woman forced to carry a non-viable fetus to term may die. He didn't sleep for a week once he understood that legislation has consequences. In his grief, Sewall called his suffering a sign from God. The women called it too late. Right, I have two more poems for you. This next one is called Walking Sticks. As a child, I used to run across my farm to the neighbor's yard, back and forth, considering the word distance, while the soles of my shoes grated against the cobblestone path. Is time a distance? If so, how far is it? I count to 5, consider the woman on the stand, how quickly an effigy is made into shadow. She stood right in front of me as she begged, and I was begging too, for 10 miles, 6 family lines, and a decade. Maybe that is far enough to feel the dullness of this moment. Over the years, time whittles my bones, arches me to its charge. 2 sticks are now required to keep me upright. I sometimes wonder if it would take me 1,000 miles to circle the earth and return to her, for me to forget that my shoes are bloodied and puckered. There is no distance that can fix what was done. 300 years later, a tourist sips Coke from a Twilight mug, tugs a witch hat over his forehead, and smiles so brightly the block shudders. Bloodthirsty in his own way, visiting a crumbled coliseum begging for a show. At least she doesn't hurt anymore. All right, and this last poem is called Roll Call. Orange witch hats litter the streets. Streaks of slippery corn syrup blood dribbles onto cobbled sidewalks. The city, a mouth, absorbs it feverishly. Sunset cocoons the dancing tourists who huddle outside bars and apothecaries, looking at stars-piercing darkness to define their salvation in the silence between 2 statements. Everything is sticky, distant, and layered. Isn't that the meaning of reality after all? A dog snaps at the heels of a child for the corner of ice cream it will never taste. The student pauses to look back at the museum entrance. She wonders what will exist when we do not, which artifacts will be ours, deemed worthy by a museum, the next witch hunt worth memorializing. It is not the ghosts of Salem we have to fear. It is the stillness that we all return to. It is the ones who bring us to that stillness. Did you learn your lesson? The teacher asks the class. Do you understand how? Maybe when the birds stop being a metaphor for freedom and poetry is the church of the people, this pilgrimage to museums can be seen as it is. Us calling out to one another, touching objects to close the distance. Instead, the student answers, a cane, the tree that sanded it, the time that made it, the soil that grew it, and the rain clouds that still circulate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. And I've added in the comments, the chat to purchase City of Contradictions. You can contact Lindsey on Twitter at LindseyAnn3. Thank you again, Lindsey. Next, we have Cindy Veach. Cindy Veach is the author of Her Kind, published by Kevin Carey Press, a finalist for the 2022 Eric Hoffer Montaigne Medal and an EP Silver Medalist in Poetry. Gloved Against Blood, published by Kevin Carey Press, a finalist for the Patterson Poetry Prize and a Massachusetts Center for the Book Must Read, and the chapbook Innocence, published by Nix's Mate. Her poems have appeared in the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, Agni, Michigan Quarterly Review, Poet Lore, Salamander, and elsewhere. A recipient of the Philip Booth Poetry Prize and Samuel Allen Washington Prize. She is poetry co-editor of Myrrh. Please welcome Cindy Veach.
Thank you. Make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah. Thank you for all being here and inviting me to read. And I have more Salem poems for you. I'm going to read from my most recent book, Her Kind, which is themed around the Salem witch trials. And those were great poems, Lindsey. Love hearing the witch poems. It's themed around the Salem witch trials, divorce, and contemporary politics. So just a little background. I lived in the Salem area for over 20 years. And in 2016, I just sort of stumbled on the Salem Witch Trials Memorial. Up to that point, I'd succumbed to the witch kitchen narrative of modern day Salem, but for some reason, and I don't understand why, on that day, it hit me and I was changed. You know, these were innocent human beings who were murdered. And I decided I'd write a poem for each of them. And that became a chapbook. While I was writing the victim poems, I was also making the difficult decision to end a long marriage. And as the person who filed for divorce, I felt judged. And as I empowered myself to do what I needed to do, I felt a sort of kinship with the female victims of the witch trials. You know, a woman with agency, a woman who dared to defy what was expected of her, was often a target. All this coincided with Donald Trump being elected. He was like a poison to me. His narcissism, misogyny, gaslighting, and his references to witch hunts and the witch trials in order to paint himself as a victim were triggering. And so he found his way into this book. At the same time, I wanted to push back on the patriarchy and celebrate women as witches, reclaiming the word witch and holding up women conjuring their own magic. Reasons you might have been accused of being a witch in 1692. You're a woman, you're middle-aged, you have an extra nipple, mole, freckle, or basically any other mark on your body. You stumble over your words. You have an extra nipple, mole, freckle. When asked to say a prayer, you stumble over the words. You're married but don't have children. When asked to say a prayer, you're the envy of other people. You're married but don't have enough children. You associate with someone suspected of witchcraft. You're the envy of other people. You're perceived as bitchy. You associate with someone suspected of witchcraft. You're milk spoiled. You're perceived as bitchy. You're of low status. You're milk spoiled. Or anything vaguely negative that happened to or around you. You're of low status. You have any mark on your body. You're milk spoiled. You're a woman. You're middle-aged. This poem is titled Spectral Evidence, and this was a type of evidence was allowed during the courts, which basically meant that you could claim that your apparition saw the accused person doing something to you. Spectral evidence. Because she said she saw, and therefore these pinholes in her skin, on one arm to be exact, look how they crisscross make a doily of the flesh. And because she said she saw you, not you, take a small pin from your pocket, a straight pin with a flat head. And because she said it was, therefore you, therefore not a dream, puncturing each pore, you in the flesh, not flesh, with a common pin. Rebecca, nurse of the accused, hanged July 19, 1692. At first, the jury returned not guilty, to which the judge said, retire and reconsider the not. After all, she had not answered the question she had not heard. Guilty of being hard of hearing, maybe mouthing what? Guilty of having a temper, arguing with neighbors. Guilty too of piety, 39 attesting to her deep devotion. Still, the afflicted swore it was her apparition that did the pinchings and prickings of their flesh. And in court, when she raised her arms, the afflicted raised their arms. And when she inclined her head, the afflicted inclined their heads. This is another victim poem. Trump has called the investigation a witch hunt 84 times. Martha Carrier, hanged August 19, 1692. They said she brought smallpox to Andover. They said she killed her father and brother, making her a queen in hell, aka landowner. Neighbors testified it was none other than Goody Carrier who haunted them at night. They said she bit Sue Sheldon, threatening to cut her throat because she wanted her to sign the book. She stuck a pin in dumb Ann Putnam, killed Samuel Preston's cow for being very lusty. And there was that devil man whispering in her ear, somehow she caused the death of Alan Toothacre's cat. For these complaints, though each one was a lie, she was condemned by the grace of God to die. Many of these poems include verbatim text from the witch trials, including the one I'm going to read now. I Witch. So what if I woke up changed? It's not like I'm a wild hog or some evil thing, not a real hog that follows you home, jumps into the window, a monkey with cock's feet, with claws. Don't believe what my accuser says, or believe it. The fact is, my divorce attorney's building sits on the side of the prison where they kept the accused in chains in 1692. I came there with a silk scarf, worn loosely at the neck, borders looped with colored thread. He came with daisies, dark chocolate, and proclaimed, my wife came towards me and found fault with me. Downstairs in the dungeon, they chained us to the walls to keep our spirits from escaping in the likeness of a bird. Dear Moon, you appear halved tonight, darkness your camouflage, chameleon, cover up. And when he says, I was only half there, I look up to you, hanging in the skylight. Even eclipsed, half full, halfway, you are not a fraction. Nothing is ever missing. You are not a part, a slice, hangnail, sliver, morsel, crescent, quarter, waning, or half-hearted. You are some, whole, all there. Next one is I Kikimora. Kikimora was a mythological female house spirit who disturbed the inhabitants of the house and the males in particular. I Kikimora. The spider first classified the year I wed. Spider, smaller than a speck of straw, spider of the bog, of swamp, wetland, marsh, quagmire, a mere wisp of khaki chaff, of hair, a sphinx moth, night butterfly, invisible wraith who slips through the keyhole after dark, both ugly and beautiful, whiny, glass half empty noisemaker, dish breaker, home wrecker, wet footprints across his heart. This is another victim poem, and the title is a quote from Donald Trump. A crazed, crying lowlife and a dog. Bridget Bishop hanged June 10th, 1692. She was the first victim of the witch trials. If she has sundry pieces of lace, some of which are so short, you can't judge them fit for any use. Their purpose is for poppets, stuck with headless pins, with the points outward in holes in cellar walls. And if, upon examination, her dried flesh hangs like teats, it is further proof. Furthermore, if there's a black pig in her orchard, or if a black creature follows you home and jumps into the window, a monkey with cock's feet, with claws, and the face somewhat more like a dog's, if when you strike it there is no substance, if she wears a red paragon bodice, borders looped with colored thread, quarrels with her husband, you old rogue, you old devil, then appears in public bloodied and bruised, accuse. I did clearly see, said Bridget Bishop. I espied, said Bridget Bishop. I'm going to read two more. And this one is called Tornado Warning. When I think about it now, I'm fearless, but sometimes I still hear the hum of our minivan coming back from Iowa City, that 2-lane highway with too many white crosses, Troopers flagging us down, ordering us to lie, belly down in the ditch. Iowa sky, imperial sky. Every spiny tendril that drops from a dark cloud reminds me of the bed fear made. Silence meant trouble, a brewing. I prayed for thunder. I welcomed the cackle of lightning, rages, yelling matches. But a sudden drop in pressure, the sucking out of sound. I got good at seeing it coming. Sky purpling, moving over our house slanting into shadow. I went down to the cellar to weather each storm. Tornadoes are cruel. Of course, I had to leave him. And then the last one is titled I, Hecate. Hecate was the Greek goddess of crossroads, and she ruled over the night and magic and where three roads meet. And she's often described as having three non-human heads. Between queen, liminal sorceress, crossroads guardian, story of my life. Who are you today, my ex would taunt. More than just a Gemini, a trimorphous, human form in triplicate. Birth, love, death, maiden, mother, crone, moon, earth, underworld. I'll take triplicity over duplicity any day. Three heads are better, even if one has to be a dog, a bitch. Dog, 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 serpent, horse, dog, cow, boar. Even if it means I am witch, that old crone at the cauldron, stirring willows, dark yew, blackthorn. It took a torch, a key, a dagger to cut away a past. It took 30 years. It took all three of me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And I've added in the chat where to purchase her books. Next, we have Rajiv Mohabir. He is the author of 4 books of poetry, including Cutlish, published by 4way Books 2021, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and a recipient of the Eric Hoffer Medal Provocateur. His poetry and nonfiction have been finalists for the 2022 PEN America Open Book Award, the Lambda Literary Award in Poetry and in Nonfiction, the Randy Schultz Award for Gay Nonfiction in both second place and finalist for the Guyana Prize for Literature in 2022, poetry and memoir respectively. His translations have won the Harold Morton Linden Translation Award from the American Academy of Poets in 2020. Well Aria, 4way Books 2023, is his 4th collection of poetry, and currently he is an assistant professor of poetry at the University of Colorado Boulder. Please welcome Rajiv.
Thank you so much, Carmelitte, for this introduction. Thank you, Cindy and Lindsey, for blessing us with your wonderful poems. My goodness, and I love the kind of like through line, the spiraling of considering, you know, what are feminist issues. And thank you to David Miller and to the New England Poetry Club for inviting me to come. And thank you all for being here. This is so great. I've been looking forward to this for so long. I'm going to be reading from my book, Whale Aria, which just came out in September from 4way. I really love the cover because my mom painted it. And it was like a fun thing to like collaborate with someone's like direct ancestor. You know what I mean? I feel like I spent so much time writing about my ancestors that like, oh, the living ones are, you know, totally worth my, you know, sight as well. So I'm going to start with this poem, you know, and it reflects themes of the ongoing genocide that's happening against the people of Palestine in Gaza. And I want to let that be in the forefront of my mind as I think about charting the migration routes of dark bodies underwater. This poem was actually written in 2014, responding to the widely publicized deaths of Black folks murdered by police officers in our progressive country. And so, you know, after Eric Garner in 2014, Michael Brown in 2014, 2014 also saw the end of Tamir Rice. In 2015, when this poem officially came out, we had witnessed also Walter Scott's demise from police hands. And this poem is called, and I'm sad and upset and frustrated that it might actually still be resonant. It's called Dominion. And it begins with an epigraph from the book of Genesis. And I'll read that verse for you now. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Genesis 1:26. Let there be light skins and colored skins, one to rule the other. A mandrake quickens into greed grab, tears a page from Genesis. Clods of earth are clods of God. Clods of earth are clods of dendrites with dirt skirting the ribs. Memory of the untouched is the more beautiful object. From the streets, gashed bodies lament this justice. Burn-scarred lives owned by light. I strike a candle against ruin, against the separation of day from night. The idea behind Whale Aria is, a complete fascination and poetic fixation that I have with the ways in which our cetacean, our whalekin, tell and craft stories that, creates an entire universe, a web of submarine connection in a way that is astounding to me and beautiful. As a poet, the metaphor of brown bodies who don't believe in borders, who were hunted to the brink of extinction, who make a comeback, is a powerful metaphor in my own human thinking. This book began as a consideration of the North Pacific humpback whale migration route, which goes from Hawaii, where I lived on occupied Kanaka Maoli land, all the way up to Vancouver. And so I was lucky enough to get to experience these whales at various points of their journeys. What you're seeing behind me is from off of the coast of Santa Barbara. This is a humpback whale. And then there's another whale in the background here. You can kind of see its blowhole, but like these other beasts are California sea lions. So this is kind of where the background comes from. And also, I'll say this now that we are in December, which the humpback whales are in their birthing grounds. The North Pacific humpback whales are in their birthing grounds, which are just outside in the water surrounding the Hawaiian Islands. The North Atlantic humpback subspecies are now in the Dominican Republic. And I love this metaphor of like traveling from the Caribbean to New England, as that's a trade route that, enslavers had created to ferry human cargo across the Atlantic. My ancestors having been indentured into the Caribbean in the 1800s. So this is kind of like the background of this story, of this book. So now I'm going to jump into the poems, and I'm going to start with Wonder. This is called Underwater Acoustics, about the first time I was underwater and experienced a humpback whale sound. Underwater acoustics. Imagine the bluest electricity of the coral sea. Dive headfirst into the bow, your arms stretched out in hallelujahs. A mother and calf slap the surface, and you are caught in the crossfire of calls. All your organs quiver. Once you immerse yourself in unending strains, the tones will haunt you. The ghosts spouting lullabies you've called since childhood. They breach and crescendo inside the vessels of your brine. How you long to touch and to be so touched by the dark giants under your skin. Some songs breathe you. Your body already knows. In the evening ink, long voices vibrate in your throat. Open your mouth and spit. I was so shocked when I started to uncover the research that biologists were doing about humpback whale songs specifically. Did you know, and this is not just like poets saying this, these are actual scientists who believe in the separation of our Umwelt, our phenomenological worlds, from those of the animals, that whale song uses, when in song sessions, they use things like regularized pattern, repetition, riffing, and what they call rhyme in order to create these songs underwater. And it's just so astounding. So as like the dorky poet that I am, I was like, what if I developed a formal constraint that echoes the scientific interpretation of what whale song does? And so the next poem is one of these whale song poems, and it is called Whale Song. Listen for assonance or the haunting of sound, to kind of be my own interpretation of rhyme in this poem. Whale Song. Silt fogs my eyes anemone. It's clear I can't see you. A bird sticks my pipes. Its feathers reach, surgeon's fingers, to trick clown my ventral pleats. Do you find a Mars heart ablaze inside my quick? A hazy thing drowned in wine. Your arm so deep it chokes my fist-sized throat. I cut this song's mooring to sail for your ear, its acoustic birth fading, dawn's dusky fate. What scintillates at start sinks into fossils lithic stone. What once birthed your body, sea changed into hollow imprint, and at the far shore, alone, cries out in losses, slate, froth. There's so much to say about like the natural history of whales, and our interactions with them as humans. This book doesn't necessarily delve into the whaling, international whaling industry that decimated populations, but this research has spawned 3 books. I just got a contract for the 2nd book that'll be coming out in 2025. But now back to thinking about my connection and human connection to whale song. This next poem is called Golden Record. And if you know, you know, and if you don't, you're about to hear. Golden Record. In the Gulf, I'm a shadow upside down, singing to the coral. The water teems with copepods and echoes. I fear the night terror of oil rig drills, blast holes hollowing my ribs where folk songs flourished. Of the erased, scientists raise dioramas and copies in resin. A pale record of the 55 languages orbits from the space station, and on that plate also whale song. From the gold disc, a copy, a woman's voice asks, Jat kahan ho akeli? Where do you go alone? I perch on my night horse, my colony body crumbles into fossil. Even at home in Boston, no one understands what I ask for when I say bira. It has 2 definitions in English. One, warrior, the other, loneliness. I think that like the poetry also like spirals so much in terms of when I think of formal constraints that I want to still play with these other kind of constraints that I've given myself. So the next poem is called Oral History, and it's a migration story, and it's written in what I call a chutney poem, which was like the kind of main thrust of Cutlish. So basically, it responds to Indo-Caribbean folk music from Guyana and Trinidad. And the one thing that you'll hear is you'll hear a chorus of this song in Guyanese Bhojpuri that I will translate at the very end of the poem as a way of both being closure and anti-closural in its gesture. Oral history. Issa bole ungri hya rakhle, hatan ki dekh ke hamar kissa maan le. Marine biologists read Rorqual keratin as diaries. Dressed just like tree rings, baleen records mysteries of diet and thalassic migration, the pox of drought and plenty. Continent side, I've grown osteocytes of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, frayed on stories of survival. The days Ma could afford chicken for curry. The weeks we ate bare saltines. Hunger bored into abad, carved lyrics into our bristles. Want naturalized its holes in trabecular serenade. Dark, hard, worn. Do we belong yet, abraded as America? Jesus said, put your finger here, look at my hands and believe. What I love about poetry readings is I have a captive audience to like talk about whales as much as I possibly can, which brings me so much joy in these dark times. This next poem is called Cultural Revolution. It's also a whale song poem, and it begins with an epigraph from Whitehead and Rendell's book called The Cultural Lives of Whales and Dolphins. In 1996, having become familiar with the song of East Australian humpback, Michael Node heard one whale singing a new and totally different song with new phrases and themes. In 1997, this novel song took over. By the end of the season, virtually all of the humpbacks passing Peregrine Beach were singing it. This whale was like an innovator, right? Teaching everyone a new dialect. Cultural Revolution. How pleading cries overleap oceans into rivers of sound scientists deem non-human revolution. It mystifies. A lone soloist lights the seaboard in new tones, a sonic blaze to streak swells, to sow new shanties before he forges a life worth its poetry. His voice haunts night oceans in silver, intoning dagger dialect. The white faces insist, speak English here, write universal themes. My minor scales queer a nation, my hands teach by drumbeat. I know you fear tongues like mine. What arias, our spells, knell. Believe, in America, Bhojpuri rises. Asakha, Hamar Sang Bhajan Baja. Thank you. The last poem that I'll read for you this afternoon is called Natural Aesthetics. And this goes back to like the thing that drives me in this poetry collection, which is wonder. Did you know that if you take a meadowlark recording and you slow it down, it'll sound like a humpback whale song? And if you speed up a humpback whale song, it'll sound like a meadowlark. What is this? It's so magical, right? And then also something about the tones in which we as humans speak. If you play with the sound and time, you will hear the kinds of intonations that humpback whales make as well. So there's something about size of body and timbre of voice that we are communicating things similarly. And this is also like me being vexed with the poetry world. So bear with me. Natural aesthetics. It shouldn't surprise that an animal's size determines a voice's timbre, or that too much technique loses the image and tricks presence and absence, both honey-dipped daggers. Speed up a humpback song, and a nightingale calls in rounds, in codas, in fermatas, and repeats. Speed it up too much, and the rorqual disappears. It took scientist musicians ages to discover that whales croon in patterns, like humans do, in different pace and pitch. Learn songs line by line, verse by verse, like the Vedas or the liturgy I've memorized, now lain as sun-baked brick, still, unmoving, unlike deep music's liquid. What poetry have I missed? Missing the silk for the worm, filling my cetacean cello chest with the mud of naming, damning with the noise of repetition. Thank you all so much.
We can unmute and applaud audibly. Please feel free. For everyone, all three, Lindsey, Cindy, Rajiv. Thank you, Carmelitte. We have time if anyone would like to comment, ask questions. And yes, and Carmelitte, thank you. She just put the purchase information again in the chat. Floor is open. Getting good comments in chat, of course. Oh, Kim, what's that? What is that?
It's one of the things I kept from my dad. He collected netsuke, and this is a whale that I bring with me back and forth.
Oh,
Very cool.
Yeah.
that's great. That's great.
Oh, do you know that Kimiko Han poem about Netsuke? I think it's called Dream of a Lacquer Box. And it's about like the things that her mother left to her. And one of which was a Netsuke, which is like maybe perhaps resonant.
That was a terrific what am I trying to say? Conjunction isn't the right word, but surprise anyway, that between Lindsey, when you began, in your pardon me, Salem sequence, I thought, ooh, I have a guess about what's going to follow from Cindy. That was terrific. Yeah. Rajiv, I have I'll say one thing. I am having read Cutlish, as I know Carmelite has, and also Anti-Man, the memoir, and listening to what you have now, what you're reading now. I've been sort of stretching after an image, and I'm thinking of, and I'd like to know what you think of this, sort of identity, so-called, as being really just kind of a permeable membrane that we kind of hold and say, okay, I'm inside this, but in fact, it's kind of eminently leakable across cultures and generations and languages, not to mention species. I mean, does that make any sense?
Oh yeah, totally. I think of identity categories as like sticks that we can pick up and create bundles with, when we want to create kind of shared community with folks, because like, you know, we have more in common than not. And the good thing about that is you can make these, what is the word I'm looking for? Alliances that are temporary, but then also like they're sticks in the bundle that you can put down when they no longer serve, right? Like, so the idea of Hinduism, like for example, like, yes, a diasporic Hinduism is a thing that I like totally love because of its possibilities for freedom, you know, for people of low caste and also with feminist outlooks. But when we interact with India and Hindutva and the Modi government, that's a stick I will put down. Or pick up a different stick in terms of forging alliance with Dalit struggle in the United States. So absolutely. And you know, it's funny because I feel like I had like an unfair head start with this, because what it means to be like from people who you know, are Indian ethnically, but also living in the Caribbean, which is the meeting place of so many peoples and cultures, that I already understand like this like internal sense of creolization, you know. So migration and movement has been kind of like instilled in me, kind of like how I just describe who I am depending on where I am, you know. So I'm lucky in that I have that kind of like you know, idea of identity to go forward. And it, you know, it comes to like also being a writer, like what does it mean to be a translator, writing nonfiction, writing poetry, and dare I say, I mean, this is being recorded and maybe people will find out eventually, but also writing fiction, that's a thing that I'm like trying to do. What does that do? At first I was like, oh, I'm never going to do that. I'm only going to write poetry. Like everything else is in service to poetry. But then I'm like, well, what if I wore that different hat? But thank you for this question.
Oh, good. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for the answer. Other questions, comments, thoughts? No?
I had a question.
Yes, Deborah, yes.
I wanted to ask, like, can you share like any personal experience or encounters with whales that have directly influenced your writing? And do you now feel that you're like landlocked? You don't live anywhere near the ocean, that will actually just like kind of like change your perspective or like change the way you feel about the ocean or whales or anything like that?
Oh my God. Yes, Carmelitte, thank you for this question. And because it's like something that's like worrying me, you know what I mean? Being like, I've always lived by the ocean, being close to like sea life is like kind of who I've been for so long. Yeah, you know, I was really lucky when I was teaching at Emerson, they gave me this funding to actually go and examine human cultures along the North Pacific humpback whale migration route. So, you know, I spent time in Hawaii, of course, in Southern California, Central California, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and into Alaska. I'm going to Vancouver this February, so I'm excited about like thinking a little bit more about there. But like, really, truly, like it's just so amazing when, you know, humpback whales are often talked about because they're what we call charismatic species, in that like we as humans can like attribute human qualities to them and then say, oh yeah, now they're worthy of saving because they're like us. And I think like that's like a big problem because like, you know, these other animals that are like, you know, really scary or like not beautiful in the ways that we understand them as humans also have ecological niches that are really important, I mean, for the health of an ecosystem. So I've been thinking about this, you know, like what is the next step? Because I also want to take steps into responsibility, you know, not just politically, but also, you know, what does it mean to be a human? And I'm trying to like consider the idea of eco poetry that exists outside of like, let's call it aesthetic fascism, because a lot of eco poetry can be coded in this like, well, you know, my language is, you know, trying to upset that binary of the human and the animal. But like the problem with this is that like, if it's a practice of aesthetics, what is its action in the world outside of a poetry community? So this is one of those things that the interaction with the whales and whale scientists and cultural practitioners of indigenous cultures in those areas have really like, you know, informed me. I was having this moment, and I'll answer the second part of your question with an anecdote. I was like driving from Florida, like this summer, I spent about a month and a half with my mom, and in Florida. And so when I was getting ready to like move into my new house, my rental house, let's be clear, I'm just a poet after all. I was driving, through the plains, and then I was like, what's gonna happen? Like, I'm missing these animals. Like, it's gonna be a thing. Like, how am I gonna move forward in the world? And as I'm like driving into the Rockies, because like Boulder is like perched right in the foothills of the Front Range, so I can see the Rockies from my window here, which is pretty like wild. But as I was driving, I had this like kind of feeling. I was like, oh my God, these look like the backs of humpback whales. And I was like, oh, the connections here, it's just going to look a little differently. And did you know that there's also like I really love scary stuff too, and like there are these cryptids apparently in the Rocky Mountains called land whales that eat people. They're these big beings that like stand on they perch on the mountaintops, and like when people walk by, they like rear their big bodies and consume folks. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is a direction. But yeah, like my life has been, I anticipate I'm going to be traveling often to the ocean. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, let's again, please, let's applaud Lindsey, Cindy, and Rajiv. Thanks so much. And I'm going to save the chat also, so I'll send it out to. Yeah, getting lots of good comments in the chat here. So I'll send it out to the three of you, and you can relive all the all of that. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you. Thanks
Doug.
very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good
Thank
afternoon.
you all so much.
Yep.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.